Out of the car before I make this difficult." Officer Ethan Cole's voice sliced through the cold drizzle as flashing red and blue lights painted the quiet Connecticut street in restless color. Naomi Carter slowly lowered her driver's side window, rain tapping softly against the black leather of her Lexus, while passing headlights reflected across the wet pavement like streaks of broken glass. She kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, fingers steady, posture calm, even as Ethan's flashlight beam lingered on her face a second too long. Around them, large suburban homes stood silent behind trimmed hedges and glowing porch lights, the kind of neighborhood where people noticed everything but pretended not to see. "License and registration," Ethan said sharply. Naomi reached carefully into her purse and handed him the documents without argument. Ethan glanced at the address on the ID, then back at her again, skepticism hardening his jaw. "This your vehicle?" he asked. Naomi nodded once. "Yes, officer." Ethan looked at the car interior slowly. Expensive dashboard, tailored coat folded neatly in the passenger seat, silver watch catching flashes of patrol lights. Nothing about it irritated him. "Funny," he muttered. "Doesn't really fit the area." Naomi's eyes lifted toward him, unreadable, controlled. "I live 15 minutes from here." Ethan gave a dry laugh under his breath. "Sure you do." The rain thickened slightly, soft drops hissing against the hood of the patrol SUV parked behind her. Two backup officers remained near the curb, watching quietly while distant thunder rolled somewhere over the trees. Naomi could feel neighbors peeking through curtains now, shadows shifting behind warm yellow windows. She had seen this before. Different city, different badge, same look in their eyes. Ethan handed the license back, but didn't step away. "You know why I pulled you over?" Naomi answered carefully. "No, sir. You rolled through that stop sign back there." Naomi blinked once. "I stopped completely." Ethan tilted his head slowly. "You calling me a liar?" The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain. Naomi inhaled quietly, steadying herself the same way her father once taught her years ago after his own traffic stop left him humiliated on the side of a highway in Georgia. Never match anger with anger. That lesson had followed her into adulthood, through law school, through federal training, through every room where people underestimated her before she even spoke. "I'm saying I stopped, officer." Ethan stared at her another second before shining the flashlight deeper into the vehicle. "Step out of the car." Naomi frowned slightly. "Is there a reason?" That question changed the atmosphere instantly. Ethan's shoulders tightened. One of the backup officers shifted uncomfortably near the curb. "Always got a question ready, don't you?" Ethan snapped. Naomi heard the words clearly, even over the rain. So did the others. The younger officer near the SUV lowered his eyes toward the pavement. Naomi slowly opened the door and stepped out onto the wet asphalt, heels touching shallow rainwater gathered near the curb. The cold air wrapped around her immediately, carrying the sharp smell of storm-soaked pine and gasoline. Ethan moved closer. "Hands where I can see them." Naomi complied without hesitation. Pulse remained steady, but deep inside, disappointment settled heavier than fear. Ethan circled behind her, searching for something suspicious that didn't exist. "You nervous?" he asked. "No, you should be." Naomi turned slightly, enough to meet his eyes beneath the flashing patrol lights. "Officer, I think you're escalating this unnecessarily." Ethan laughed once, humorless. "And I think people like you forget who keeps these streets safe." A porch light flicked on across the street. Somewhere nearby, a phone camera quietly started recording. Naomi noticed, but said nothing. Ethan reached toward the passenger side door. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Naomi's voice stayed calm. "Do you have probable cause?" That was the moment his expression changed completely. The irritation vanished. What replaced it was colder, more personal. Rain slid down the side of Naomi's face as Ethan stepped closer, towering over her beneath the spinning lights. "You got a real attitude problem tonight," he said quietly. Naomi held his stare without flinching. "No, officer," she answered softly. "You just expected someone else." For a moment, neither of them moved. Rainwater slid from the edge of Ethan Cole's flashlight and splashed against the pavement between them, while the patrol lights continued spinning across Naomi Carter's face in waves of blue and red. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once before the neighborhood fell silent again. Ethan stared at her like he was trying to force discomfort out of her, but Naomi simply adjusted the sleeve of her dark coat and kept her posture straight. She had spent too many years inside federal buildings, courtrooms, and police departments to mistake intimidation for authority. "Turn around," Ethan said flatly. Naomi slowly complied. One of the backup officers shifted again near the patrol SUV. His name tag read Ramirez. Younger than Ethan. Nervous eyes. He glanced toward Naomi for half a second before looking away. Ethan reached for his cuffs. "Officer," Naomi said carefully, "I do not consent to any search, and I would advise you to slow this situation down." Ethan tightened his jaw. "You threatening me now?" "No," Naomi answered softly. "I am trying to help you." That answer only irritated him more. The metal cuffs clicked around her wrists while rain tapped steadily against the roofs of parked cars lining the street. Across the road, a middle-aged white couple stood behind their living room curtains pretending not to stare. A teenager farther down the block openly held up a phone, recording everything from a second-floor bedroom window. Ethan ignored all of it. "Always think you know the law after watching a few videos online," he muttered. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. The phrase hit an old bruise inside her memory. She was 12 again, sitting in the passenger seat beside her father outside Macon, Georgia, while a deputy accused him of stealing his own truck because a black man driving a clean Ford F-150 through a wealthy county apparently looked suspicious. She still remembered her father's hands resting calmly on the wheel, while humiliation filled the silence inside the truck like smoke. "Never let another person's hatred rewrite your dignity." He had repeated those words later that night, while her mother cleaned rainwater from his jacket at the kitchen sink. Naomi carried those words into every room she entered now. Ethan guided her toward the patrol SUV. "Sit tight while we figure out what you are hiding." Naomi looked toward him over her shoulder. "You still think this is about my car?" Ethan opened the rear door without answering. The interior light illuminated the rain drifting sideways through the night air like silver threads. Naomi carefully sat inside the vehicle, cuffs resting against her dark wool coat, while cold air fogged the edges of the windows. Ethan shut the door harder than necessary. Outside, Ramirez approached him cautiously. Naomi could not hear every word through the glass, but she caught enough. No priors. Vehicle registered to her. No warrants. Ethan dismissed him with a sharp wave. "Then why is she acting like this?" Ramirez hesitated. "Like what?" Ethan looked irritated by the question itself. "You know exactly what I mean." Ramirez said nothing after that. Naomi watched the younger officer step backward slowly, conflict written all over his face beneath the rain. Ethan paced near the front bumper, flashlight still in hand, trying to justify instincts he no longer fully trusted. Naomi recognized the pattern immediately. Men like Ethan rarely believed they were cruel. They believed they were right. That was what made them dangerous inside systems built on unchecked confidence. The radio on Ethan's shoulder crackled suddenly with static before dispatch came through. "Unit 12, status check." Ethan grabbed the radio immediately. "Routine traffic stop. Everything under control." Naomi lowered her eyes quietly at those words. Under control. The phrase echoed strangely in the patrol car. Outside, thunder rolled again, lower this time, vibrating faintly through the glass. Ethan leaned against the hood of the SUV and glanced toward Naomi sitting handcuffed in the back seat. She did not look angry. That unsettled him more than if she had screamed. Her calmness felt deliberate, almost patient. Then his radio crackled again. This time dispatch sounded different. Tighter. "Unit 12, supervisor requesting immediate callback." Ethan frowned. For what? There was a pause long enough for rain to fill the silence. Then dispatch answered carefully. They received confirmation regarding the driver. Ethan looked toward Naomi again through the rain-streaked window. For the first time that night, uncertainty touched his face. The rain slowed to a thin mist, but the tension outside the patrol SUV only grew heavier. Officer Ethan Cole stood motionless beside the hood for several seconds. Radio pressed near his shoulder while dispatch repeated itself more carefully this time. "Supervisor en route. Do not escalate further." Ethan glanced toward Naomi Carter again through the wet glass. She sat exactly the same way she had before, wrists restrained, posture upright, calm eyes fixed somewhere beyond the windshield, as if she were watching thoughts instead of the storm. Most people became louder when they were afraid. They argued, pleaded, threatened lawsuits. Naomi had done none of it. That silence was beginning to crawl under Ethan's skin. Ramirez approached slowly again, water dripping from the brim of his cap. Maybe we should uncuff her until Sergeant Wallace gets here, he suggested quietly. Ethan immediately shook his head. Absolutely not. Why? Ramirez asked carefully. Ethan looked irritated by the question. Because something about this is off. Ramirez lowered his voice. Or maybe she just knows her rights. Ethan stared at him for a moment, but said nothing. Across the street, porch lights continued glowing through the foggy drizzle, while phone cameras remained fixed on the scene from behind curtains and upstairs windows. The entire block felt suspended in uncomfortable stillness. Inside the SUV, Naomi slowly flexed her fingers against the cold metal cuffs. Her wrists ached slightly, but her expression never changed. She watched Ethan through the rain-speckled glass the same way she had watched dozens of officers before him during investigations that started exactly like this one. Confidence first. Justification second. Regret much later, if it came at all. Her phone buzzed again somewhere inside her coat pocket, muffled but persistent. Probably her mother by now. Evelyn Carter worried whenever Naomi drove alone at night, especially after meetings connected to active investigations. Naomi remembered promising her earlier that evening she would only be gone an hour. You work too much around angry men, Evelyn had warned gently over dinner. Naomi smiled faintly at the memory despite the cold patrol car. Her mother had spent 30 years teaching third grade in Atlanta public schools and still believed kindness could soften almost anyone. Naomi admired that. She just no longer fully believed it herself. Outside, Ethan opened the rear passenger door abruptly. Damp air rushed inside immediately. Step out, he ordered. Naomi looked up calmly. Am I being arrested? Ethan hesitated for half a second. Not yet. Then why am I detained? Ethan's jaw tightened again. Because I said so. Naomi slowly stepped out of the vehicle. Rainwater shimmered across the asphalt under the flashing lights, while distant thunder rolled low over the neighborhood rooftops. Ethan moved closer, lowering his voice. Who exactly are you? Naomi studied him quietly before answering. That question should have mattered before the handcuffs. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose. Do not play games with me. I am not the one playing games tonight, officer. The words landed harder than he expected. Ramirez looked away again, visibly uncomfortable now. Then headlights appeared at the far end of the street. Two black SUVs turned the corner slowly, their headlights cutting through the mist with quiet precision. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just controlled movement. Ethan straightened immediately. Ramirez frowned. Who was that? Naomi already knew. The first SUV stopped near the curb. A tall woman in a dark federal raincoat stepped out holding a folder beneath her arm, while another suited agent followed behind her. Their badges glinted briefly beneath the patrol lights. Ethan's posture shifted instantly from aggressive to uncertain. The woman approached without rushing. Officer Ethan Cole? He nodded slowly. Yes, this cannot be right, he muttered. The federal agent's expression never changed. It is exactly right. Ethan swallowed hard. She is the investigator? The woman nodded once. Senior Civil Rights Investigator Naomi Carter. Silence fell over the street so completely that even the rain suddenly sounded louder. Ethan looked back toward Naomi again, but this time the confidence in his eyes was gone. In its place sat something colder. The first unmistakable crack of fear. Officer Ethan Cole read the first page again as rainwater gathered along the edges of the document in his hands. His flashlight trembled slightly now, enough for Ramirez to notice. Across the street, the glow from neighborhood windows reflected against the wet pavement, while the quiet hum of idling engines filled the cold night air. Naomi Carter remained standing beside the patrol SUV exactly as she had before, wrists restrained, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm beneath the soft mist drifting through the streetlights. But everything had changed. Ethan looked at her differently now, not as a suspicious driver, not as someone beneath him. He was looking at her like a man suddenly realizing the floor under his feet was thinner than he thought. The federal agent stepped closer, raincoat darkened by water at the shoulders. Officer Cole, she said evenly, remove the cuffs. Ethan hesitated. It was only a second, maybe less, but Naomi noticed it immediately. Men like Ethan were trained to command situations, not surrender them. His entire posture struggled against the humiliation settling over him. Slowly, he reached for the handcuff key attached to his belt. The metal clicked softly as the restraints loosened from Naomi's wrists. Red pressure marks remained against her skin beneath the patrol lights. Ethan stepped back quickly after removing them, almost as if he no longer trusted himself to stand too close to her. Naomi rubbed one wrist gently, but said nothing. Silence spread again across the block. Heavy. Watching. Ramirez looked like he wanted to disappear completely. The younger officer avoided eye contact with everyone now, staring down at the puddles forming near his boots while distant thunder rolled over the neighborhood one more time. Ethan cleared his throat. Ma'am, I did not know who you were. Naomi finally looked directly at him. Rain clung to her eyelashes, but her expression remained unreadable. That sentence, she said quietly, is exactly why we are here. Ethan's face tightened. The federal agent beside him opened the folder in her hands and removed several printed photographs sealed in plastic sleeves. Ramirez glanced over accidentally and immediately recognized Ethan in every image. Different traffic stops, different neighborhoods, different black drivers standing beside expensive cars beneath patrol lights. The same pattern every time. Ethan noticed Ramirez seeing the photos and quickly looked away. This investigation has been active for 7 months. The federal agent continued calmly. Multiple complaints. Body camera inconsistencies. Civilian recordings. Internal review flags. Ethan swallowed hard. You set me up? Naomi answered before the agent could. No, officer. We gave you a choice. Ethan stared at her, confused. Naomi stepped slightly closer, her voice never rising above the sound of rain tapping against metal and asphalt. You could have treated me with professionalism from the beginning. You could have slowed down when I asked you to. You could have listened to your partner when he expressed concern. Ethan glanced briefly toward Ramirez, whose silence now felt louder than any accusation. Naomi continued softly. Instead, you kept escalating because you believed you already knew who I was. Ethan's jaw shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all night, he had no answer ready. Across the street, one of the porch lights switched off, but the phone camera from the upstairs bedroom still remained visible behind the glass. Naomi noticed it again and thought about how many moments like this had disappeared over the years before technology forced people to finally witness them. The federal agent handed Ethan another document. You are being placed on immediate administrative leave pending full review. Ethan looked down at the paper, but barely seemed able to process the words. Patrol lights reflected across his wet uniform in restless streaks of blue and red. The same lights that had looked powerful earlier now made him appear exposed. Smaller somehow. This cannot end my career, he muttered quietly, almost to himself. Naomi watched him for a long moment before answering. Careers survive mistakes all the time. Ethan looked up slowly. Naomi's voice stayed calm. Character is harder to rebuild. The words landed harder than anger would have. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the soaked pavement while rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of his flashlight onto the ground below. No one spoke after that. The entire street seemed to breathe differently now, as if the night itself understood something had broken open beneath those flashing lights. Then Naomi reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and finally returned her mother's missed call. Naomi Carter stepped away from the flashing patrol lights and lifted the phone slowly to her ear while cold rain continued drifting through the quiet suburban street. Mama, she said softly. On the other end, Evelyn Carter released the kind of breath only mothers carried, the sound of worry trying to disguise itself as patience. Naomi, baby, are you all right? Naomi glanced briefly over her shoulder. Officer Ethan Cole still stood beside the patrol SUV holding the administrative leave notice with both hands now, rainwater soaking the edges until the paper curled slightly between his fingers. The younger officer, Ramirez, remained near the curb staring silently at the ground as federal agents moved calmly around the scene collecting reports and recording statements. I am okay, Naomi answered. Just running late. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. You sound tired. Naomi smiled faintly despite herself. Long night. Her mother knew her too well to ask more questions over the phone. Drive safe when you come home, Evelyn said gently. And Naomi? Yes, Naomi turned carefully. Ethan stepped closer but stopped several feet away, uncertainty visible in every movement. His patrol uniform clung damply to his shoulders beneath the rotating red and blue lights, while the federal document remained folded awkwardly in his hand. I need to explain something, he said quietly. Naomi watched him without responding immediately. Across the street, the teenager recording from the upstairs window finally lowered the phone. One by one, porch lights throughout the neighborhood began shutting off as curiosity slowly gave way to exhaustion. Cole was ending. But the consequences were only beginning. You were right, Ethan admitted finally. I made assumptions. Naomi tilted her head slightly. About what? Ethan hesitated. That hesitation said more than his answer ever could. I thought. He stopped again, struggling now against the weight of his own words. I thought something did not fit. Naomi looked down briefly at the wet pavement reflecting the patrol lights like fractured glass. A black woman driving an expensive car through a wealthy neighborhood, she said calmly. Ethan lowered his eyes. Yes. The honesty landed heavily between them. Ramirez looked up sharply from across the street, surprised Ethan had admitted it aloud. Naomi folded her arms slowly against the cold. You know what the problem is, Officer Cole. Ethan shook his head once. Naomi's voice remained quiet, almost gentle. You saw my skin before you saw my behavior. You decided who I was before I even spoke. Ethan opened his mouth to defend himself, but nothing came out. Because deep down, he knew she was right. The rain softened further until only a fine mist remained floating beneath the streetlights. Somewhere nearby, water dripped steadily from a gutter in slow rhythmic taps. One of the federal agents approached Naomi with a tablet for her statement signature. Naomi reviewed the document carefully before signing. Ethan washed her hands while she wrote. Steady, precise, controlled. The same hands he had restrained less than 30 minutes earlier. That realization visibly unsettled him all over again. I never hated anyone, Ethan said suddenly, almost desperate now. Naomi looked back at him. Hatred is loud, she answered softly. Bias is quieter. That is why it survives longer. Ethan stood completely still after that. The federal agents began returning to their vehicles while Ramirez quietly removed equipment from the patrol SUV in silence. No one rushed anymore. The energy of the street had changed entirely. Earlier, the flashing lights had carried authority. Now they only exposed what had happened beneath them. Naomi stepped toward her Lexus slowly. Rainwater shimmered across the dark paint while droplets slid down the windshield in silver lines beneath the glow of nearby porch lights. She paused before opening the driver's door and turned back one final time. Ethan remained standing near the curb alone now, shoulders heavy, administrative leave notice hanging loosely at his side. He looked less like an officer in that moment and more like a man meeting himself honestly for the first time. Naomi studied him quietly before speaking. The worst part is not what happened tonight, she said. Ethan looked up slowly. Naomi's eyes held his steadily. It is how normal it felt to you while you were doing it. No one spoke after that. Even the storm seemed to fall silent around them. The federal SUVs disappeared one by one into the wet Connecticut night, their headlights fading beyond the rows of quiet suburban homes until only the patrol lights remained flashing weakly against the rain-dark street. Naomi Carter sat inside her Lexus for several moments without starting the engine. The interior smelled faintly of leather, rainwater, and cold air drifting through the door she had not fully closed yet. Her hands rested quietly on the steering wheel while droplets slid slowly down the windshield in uneven silver trails. Outside, Officer Ethan Cole remained standing near the curb exactly where she had left him. He no longer looked like the confident officer who had approached her car earlier that night. The storm had washed something away from him. Not authority. Something deeper. The illusion that authority alone made him right. Naomi leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes briefly. The pressure marks on her wrists still lingered beneath the sleeves of her coat. They would fade by morning. But she knew the memory would not. None of them ever really disappeared. They only layered themselves quietly over older memories until a person learned to carry them without showing the weight. Her phone buzzed softly again. This time it was a message from her supervisor. Excellent restraint tonight. Proud of how you handled it. Naomi stared at the screen for a second before locking the phone again without replying. Compliments always felt strange after nights like this. There was nothing victorious about proving someone's prejudice correct enough to investigate. Across the street, a little girl no older than 10 peeked out from behind a curtain inside one of the houses. Naomi noticed her immediately. The child's eyes stayed fixed on the patrol lights, wide and quiet, trying to understand a world adults rarely explained honestly. Naomi remembered being that same age once, sitting beside her father during a traffic stop while red and blue lights reflected across the windshield of his old truck like warning signs from another universe. She remembered how small he looked afterward when they finally drove away in silence. Not weak, just tired. Tired of surviving moments he should never have needed to survive at all. A soft knock against her passenger window pulled Naomi back to the present. Ramirez stood outside, holding a folded umbrella. She lowered the window halfway. Rain drifted inside immediately. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I just wanted to say, I should have stepped in sooner." Naomi studied him quietly. The young officer looked genuinely shaken now, the kind of shaken that comes when someone watches their profession split open in front of them. "You spoke up," Naomi answered softly. Ramirez shook his head. "Not enough." Naomi glanced toward Ethan still standing near the patrol SUV alone. "Most people wait for permission before doing the right thing," she said. "That is how bad systems stay alive." Ramirez lowered his eyes. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the umbrella onto the pavement between them. "Will he lose everything?" he asked quietly. Naomi did not answer immediately. Instead, she watched Ethan in the distance beneath the fading patrol lights. He looked older now somehow, shoulders heavy beneath the wet uniform, flashlight hanging loosely from one hand, as though he no longer remembered why he was holding it. "That depends," Naomi finally said. Ramirez looked back up. Naomi's voice remained calm. "Some people lose their careers and learn nothing. Others lose certainty and finally begin changing." Ramirez absorbed the words silently. Then he nodded once and stepped away from the car. Naomi rolled the window back up slowly. The world outside became quieter immediately, softened by glass and rain. For another minute, she simply sat there listening to the faint ticking sound of cooling engine metal and distant thunder fading farther into the night. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan Cole began walking toward her car. Slowly. No arrogance left in his posture now. No performance. Just a man carrying the full weight of what he had become aware of. Naomi watched him approach through the rain-speckled windshield without moving. Ethan stopped several feet from the driver's side window, uncertain whether he even deserved to be this close anymore. Naomi lowered the glass slightly. Rain drifted between them again. Ethan looked at her for a long moment before speaking. His voice came out quieter than before. "My father taught me this job was about control," he admitted. Naomi said nothing. Ethan swallowed hard. Tonight was the first time I realized how much fear can hide inside that word. The flashing patrol lights reflected across both their faces in silence while the rain continued falling softly around them like the night itself was listening. Naomi Carter listened without interrupting while rain whispered softly against the roof of her Lexus. Officer Ethan Cole stood outside the half-open window with water dripping from the edge of his jawline and soaking through the shoulders of his uniform. For the first time that night, he did not look like someone trying to win. He looked like someone trying to understand himself before the moment disappeared and pride returned to protect him again. Naomi rested one hand lightly against the steering wheel. "Fear does not always look angry," she said quietly. Ethan lowered his eyes. "I thought I was reading danger." Naomi looked out through the windshield where the last patrol lights still reflected across puddles in restless red and blue waves. "No," she answered softly. "You were reading difference." Ethan absorbed the words in silence. Somewhere nearby, wind moved through the wet trees lining the street, carrying the faint smell of rain-soaked pine across the neighborhood. The little girl behind the curtain across the street was still watching. Naomi noticed her again. Children always watch more carefully than adults realized. Ethan followed Naomi's gaze and finally noticed the child too. He looked away almost immediately, ashamed now of being seen. "When I started this job," he admitted slowly, "my father told me hesitation gets officers hurt." Naomi nodded once. "And when I was 12, my father told me survival sometimes means staying calm while someone disrespects you." Ethan swallowed hard. The contrast between those lessons settled heavily between them. Two fathers. Two versions of America. Two completely different understandings of danger. Naomi continued quietly. "Your fear taught you to control situations before understanding them. Mine taught me to survive situations where I was never fully seen as innocent to begin with." Ethan's face tightened slightly as the truth reached deeper now than policy violations or disciplinary review. This was no longer about paperwork. It was about inheritance. about the beliefs handed down quietly across generations until they felt normal enough to never question. A police radio crackled faintly from inside the patrol SUV, breaking the silence for only a second before fading again. Ramirez remained near the curb speaking softly with another officer, but his eyes occasionally drifted back toward Ethan. Naomi could tell the younger officer was listening even from a distance. Everyone was listening now. Ethan rubbed a hand across his forehead slowly. I keep replaying it in my head, he admitted. The moment I walked up to your car, I already decided who you were before you said a single word. Naomi finally turned fully toward him. Most prejudice does not begin with hatred, she said. It begins with assumption. Ethan nodded faintly. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the car window between them in slow, steady taps. Do you know the worst part? He asked quietly. Naomi waited. Ethan looked down at his reflection, distorted inside a puddle near the curb. It all felt routine. The honesty in his voice carried no defense anymore, only realization. Naomi studied him for a long moment before answering. That is why people get hurt by systems long before anyone notices the damage. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Somewhere inside one of the nearby houses, a television flickered blue against a living room wall. Ordinary life continuing only yards away from a moment that would alter both of them permanently. Naomi thought about all the reports she had read over the years. Officers insisting they felt threatened. Civilians insisting they felt erased. Entire investigations built from moments that began exactly like this one. Small assumptions growing teeth under authority. Ethan opened his eyes again. What happens now? Naomi leaned back slightly in her seat. The investigation continues. Ethan nodded once, but his expression suggested he already understood that part. What he really meant was something deeper. Naomi saw it immediately. What happens to the version of myself I believed in before tonight? The rain softened again until it barely made a sound anymore. Naomi looked at him carefully before speaking. Accountability is not the end of a person, she said quietly. Sometimes it is the first honest beginning they have ever had. Ethan looked stunned by the answer. He had expected anger. Maybe humiliation. He had not expected grace measured carefully enough to still hold truth inside it. Naomi reached toward the ignition, then paused one final time. But honesty only matters, she added softly, if it changes what you do next when nobody is watching. Ethan stood speechless beside the car as Naomi finally started the engine. Warm air filled the quiet interior while the headlights illuminated the rain-dark street ahead. Behind her, the flashing patrol lights slowly shut off one by one, leaving the neighborhood in ordinary darkness again. By the time Naomi Carter pulled into her mother's driveway, the rain had almost disappeared completely. Only a thin fog remained drifting across the sleeping Atlanta suburb, while pale porch lights glowed softly against wet sidewalks and trimmed hedges. Naomi sat inside the car for a moment after turning off the engine, listening to the ticking sound of cooling metal beneath the hood. Her reflection stared back faintly from the dark windshield. Tired eyes, damp curls resting against the collar of her coat, red marks still faintly visible around her wrists. She exhaled slowly before stepping out into the cold night air. The front porch light switched on before she even reached the steps. Evelyn Carter opened the door wearing a loose gray sweater and house slippers, concern immediately softening her face the second she saw Naomi standing there soaked from the storm. Baby, Evelyn whispered gently. Naomi stepped into her mother's arms without saying anything at first. The warmth of the embrace loosened something inside her chest she had been holding tight all evening. Inside the house, everything smelled like cinnamon tea and old books. Familiar. Safe. A jazz record played quietly somewhere in the background while rainwater dripped softly from Naomi's coat onto the hardwood floor near the doorway. Evelyn guided her toward the kitchen table without asking questions right away. Mothers who raise strong daughters learn patience early. Naomi wrapped both hands around a warm mug while steam curled slowly into the air between them. You saw that look again tonight, Evelyn said softly after a while. Naomi looked down into the tea. Yes. Evelyn nodded sadly, like she already knew every detail without needing to hear them. Your father used to come home with that same silence in his eyes. Naomi glanced toward the framed photograph resting near the kitchen window. Her father smiling beside an old pickup truck decades earlier beneath bright Georgia sunlight, before cancer took him. Back before Naomi fully understood how much dignity he had carried through humiliation no one should have endured. He tried to teach me not to hate people for what they fear, Naomi said quietly. Evelyn reached across the table and touched her daughter's hand gently. And tonight, Naomi stared at the steam rising from her cup. Tonight, I understood how exhausting that lesson really is. Silence settled comfortably between them after that. Outside, wind moved softly through the trees while water dripped from the gutters in slow, steady rhythms. Then Naomi's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. For a second, she considered ignoring it. But something told her not to. Naomi answered carefully. "This is Naomi Carter." A quiet voice responded almost immediately. "It is Ramirez." Naomi leaned back slightly in her chair. Evelyn noticed the change in her expression but stayed silent. "Officer Ramirez," Naomi answered calmly. "I hope I am not calling too late," he said nervously. "No," Ramirez hesitated before continuing. "I just wanted you to know. I submitted my statement already." Naomi listened quietly. Everything that happened tonight is documented exactly how it occurred. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. She understood immediately what that meant. Testifying against another officer inside a department culture built on silence was not a small thing. It could isolate him completely. Ramirez continued softly. "I kept thinking about what you said. About waiting for permission to do the right thing." Naomi glanced toward her mother again. Evelyn watched her carefully now, pride hidden gently behind tired eyes. "I should have spoken sooner," Ramirez admitted. "But I am speaking now." Naomi's voice softened. "That matters." Ramirez exhaled shakily through the phone. "Most people think courage feels powerful. Honestly, it just feels lonely." Naomi looked toward the dark kitchen window where her own reflection stared back faintly through the glass. "Sometimes loneliness is the price of integrity," she answered quietly. Another silence followed. One felt different from the others tonight. Less heavy, less hopeless. Before ending the call, Ramirez spoke once more. "For what it is worth, I do not think Officer Cole understood what he looked like until he saw himself through your eyes." Naomi absorbed the words carefully after the line disconnected. Evelyn finally smiled faintly from across the kitchen table. "Your father used to say something similar," she said softly. Naomi looked up. Evelyn stirred her tea slowly before continuing. "He said sometimes the only mirror strong enough to change a person is grace they did not deserve." Naomi lowered her eyes quietly while rain whispered against the windows one last time before the storm finally passed. Federal employees passed by in low conversation, but Naomi barely noticed them. Her mind still returned sometimes to the sound of rain against a patrol car window and the look on Ethan Cole's face when certainty finally cracked open inside him. At the end of the hallway, a courtroom door stood slightly open. Naomi paused there for a moment. Inside, administrative review officers shuffled paperwork while a ceiling fan hummed softly overhead. Ethan sat alone near the far end of the room wearing a dark gray suit instead of a police uniform now. Without the badge, he looked younger somehow, less armored. The confidence that once filled every movement had been replaced by something quieter. Awareness. He noticed Naomi standing at the doorway and slowly rose to his feet. For a second, neither of them spoke. Sunlight stretched across the polished floor between them in long golden lines, while muffled city traffic drifted faintly through the high windows above. Ethan stepped forward carefully. "Investigator Carter." Naomi nodded once. "Officer Cole." He gave a small, uncomfortable smile. "Former officer, technically." Naomi studied him silently. He looked tired. Not broken. Just changed. There was a difference. Ethan glanced down briefly before speaking again. "I wanted to thank you." Naomi raised an eyebrow slightly. "Most people do not thank the person investigating them." Ethan let out a quiet breath through his nose. "Most people do not get forced to see themselves honestly either." The words carried no bitterness now, only truth. Naomi noticed a small notebook tucked beneath his arm, corners worn already from use. Ethan followed her gaze. "Counseling," he explained quietly, "and community training programs." Naomi said nothing, but something in her expression softened almost invisibly. Ethan looked toward the courtroom doors behind him. "I spent 15 years thinking authority meant staying in control." He paused carefully. "I never realized how much fear I carried into every interaction until that night." Naomi leaned lightly against the hallway wall, listening. Ethan continued slowly. choosing every word with unusual care now. When I saw your car, your clothes, the neighborhood, part of me already built a story before I even reached your window. Naomi crossed her arms gently. And stories become dangerous when people with power stop questioning them. Ethan nodded immediately. I know that now. Down the hallway, someone laughed softly near an elevator before the sound faded away again. The building felt strangely peaceful compared to the stormy night that had brought them here. Naomi noticed sunlight warming the marble floor near Ethan's shoes. No flashing lights. No rain. No audience behind curtains. Just two people standing in the quiet aftermath of truth. Ethan looked at her carefully. I used to think accountability meant punishment, he admitted. But honestly, he glanced down at the notebook in his hands. It feels more like learning how much damage blindness can cause before someone finally opens your eyes. Naomi absorbed the words silently. Then she noticed movement farther down the hallway. Ramirez approached, carrying a cardboard file box beneath one arm. He smiled faintly when he saw Naomi. Good morning, ma'am. Naomi returned the smile gently. Good morning, Officer Ramirez. Ethan looked toward the younger officer, and for the first time, there was no resentment in his face. Only humility. Ramirez stopped beside them awkwardly. I testified this morning, he explained quietly. Naomi nodded once. I know. Ramirez glanced toward Ethan before speaking again. I almost stayed silent that night. Ethan surprised both of them by answering first. But you did not. Ramirez looked caught off guard. Ethan extended his hand slowly. That mattered more than you realize. After a brief hesitation, Ramirez shook it. The moment was simple, quiet. But Naomi understood its weight immediately. Real change rarely arrived through speeches or headlines. Sometimes it arrived through uncomfortable honesty shared in empty hallways long after cameras disappeared. A clerk opened the courtroom doors then and called Ethan's name. He straightened slightly before stepping toward the entrance. Before disappearing inside, he turned back one final time toward Naomi. Sunlight caught the side of his face while the old fear that once hardened his expression seemed finally absent. Your father would have been proud of you, he said softly. Naomi felt the words settle deep inside her chest. She did not answer right away. She simply watched the courtroom doors close gently behind him while morning light continued spilling across the marble floor in complete silence. Somewhere outside, wind moved softly through the autumn trees, and for the first time since that stormy night, the world felt still.